Okay, everybody. So today in Adobe After Effects, we are going to talk about something that I have kind of a strange history with, and that is shape layers. Now, shape layers are a way of drawing and creating objects and making things inside of After Effects using shapes. So it's kind of like incorporating Adobe Illustrator into Adobe After Effects, which I will be honest, when I first encountered it, I was not really excited about it because, to tell the truth, I'm not a real great graphic artist and I don't really understand how to make great graphics. I don't have a background in vector art and all these other kind of things. And so I was really intimidated about making shape layers. But as I continue to explore it and explore it in Adobe After Effects, which maybe I should have explored in Adobe Illustrator and been less afraid of it, but as I explored in Adobe After Effects, I realized it wasn't so scary and I didn't have to be so afraid of it. And I can potentially make some things if I understand how the interface works to make shape layers. So let's take a look at some things first off. I'm going to bring in, just to show you an idea, I'm going to bring in this clip of New York City aerial that we've seen before. We're going to zoom in here in New York City aerial. And up in the top here, we have these buttons here that allow us to control different masks. And so these buttons up here, the rectangle tool, for example, I can click on this and I can make a rectangle. And if I'm clicked on a layer, I can click a rectangle and I can make, say, a mask. And so this would be a mask that I would make on here. That is not a shape layer. And I've said before, I think in a previous lesson, that I've said if you don't have a layer or if you're not selected on a layer, what you will do instead when you use the rectangle tool is you'll make something called a shape layer. And a shape layer is not a mask. And it's not even a solid. So I know a lot of students sometimes, they'll go in here and I'll say, hey, hit Command Y and make a solid. And they'll go, well, they have this little tool right here, and this tool will make a rectangle, and that's sort of like a solid. Well, they're kind of different. One is a solid, and you can make this, 400 by 400, and you can kind of program this in and change whatever color you want to and make this blue or whatever it may be. And you can make a solid, and it makes a solid on the screen called a royal blue solid here on the layer. But in this case, we're making shape layers. So let's get rid of New York City aerial. Let's just make a new comp, Command N, make a new comp. We're going to make this a little bit shorter. We'll make this just 10 seconds long. Doesn't even matter at this point. We have a comp here, and we're going to go here with this rectangle, and we're going to make a shape layer. Now, when we make a shape layer, we're going to make a rectangle kind of over here in the corner. We're going to click and drag and pull a rectangle. We can pull a wide rectangle or a tall rectangle, or we can hold down Shift and make a perfectly square rectangle. But we'll make a rectangle kind of this shape like so. Now, it's made this layer called a shape layer. And inside of this layer is a contents folder. And inside of the contents folder is a rectangle, or the contents grouping here. It groups these inside an area called contents. Now, this is where it gets a little bit strange, because I have the rectangle, and the rectangle has attributes. It has the rectangular path, the stroke, the fill, and the transform. Let me do this over again, and I'll start from scratch here just to show you how this works. I'm going to click on this rectangle, and if I'm not clicked on a layer, I'm going to make a shape layer. But I'm also going to see when I click on the rectangle, it tells me, ask me for a fill color, and a stroke color, and a stroke width. So we're going to change the fill color to a color like blue. Just for example, like blue. And we're going to make the stroke width a little bit bigger. We're going to click on this 2 and type in 5, maybe even 8, and make a stroke width of 8. Now it's going to make a blue rectangle with an 8 stroke. We're going to click and drag. It's going to make a shape layer. And in that shape layer, it's going to make a rectangle. Okay, the shape layer has transform properties. It has a position. It has a scaling. It has a rotation. It has an opacity. This is for the whole layer. I'm going to undo a bunch and go back to where we were. Great. We're back here with the transform controls. Notice the anchor point is in the center of the screen. So it's taking the liberty of putting the anchor point in the center of the screen. I could use the pan behind tool and I could move the anchor point probably to the center of this layer and hold down Command and it would snap right to the center of this layer. And now it would be in the center of this layer. It's here. Not in the center of the screen, but in the center of the layer here. Now, I can make other shapes. So if I'm clicking the shape layer or if I'm clicking the contents folder, either way, I can go here and I can hold down and I can make, say, an ellipse. And I can make a circle of an ellipse. Notice this circle is also blue and white. Blue with a white stroke that's 8 pixels wide. If I hold down Shift, I'll make a perfect circle. But I can make my circle whatever shape I want to. I'll make a perfect circle here. Now I'm going to go back to the selection tool and I'm going to grab this and I'm going to be able to move my circle to another place here. I can grab my rectangle and move my rectangle to another location here, and that moves the rectangle. But I can also move the whole layer. Now notice the anchor point is still over here somewhere. I could right click and reset my anchor point, put my anchor point in the center of here, and now my anchor point is in the center of this layer. And you notice the container box when I'm on the shape layer includes all of the shape of the rectangle and all the shape of the circle. And as I move this circle and I'll move this rectangle, so if I click on the ellipse and move the ellipse, and I click and move the rectangle over to here, when I go back to the shape layer, now the container box is this big, including all of the circle and all of the rectangle. But as I move these, this is going to change the size of the shape layer. Back to the shape layer, now the shape layer is this big. And the anchor point is kind of in a weird place for this, for where this is. I could again go to the shape layer here and move these again, and here it would change the overall shape of the container box. I'm going to make the container box just a different color, maybe like a red, so you can actually see how this is contained here. We'll go to here. We'll choose, say, maybe a polygon. We'll make a polygon. By default, it will make a pentagon, but as I'm dragging, I can hit the up and down arrows and make more sides. I'll make an octagon here. There I have an octagon there like so. So now I have the polygon, I have the ellipse, and I have the rectangle. Right now, if you look at this, the polygon itself, we'll go back to the selection tool. The polygon is on top of the rectangle, and it's on top of the ellipse. I can change the order of these and put the ellipse on top of the polygon, and now it's the ellipse over polygon, so it's how it's stacked here within this contents folder there. Now, within each of these objects, we're going to take this ellipse. We'll put the ellipse over here a little bit. We'll take the rectangle. We'll put the rectangle underneath over here a little bit. I have each of these objects like so. Maybe we'll have them overlap just a little bit. Now, within each of these objects, forget the transform controls. I have the ability right here to say with the rectangle, now the rectangle has controls. It has a rectangular path, rectangular stroke, rectangular fill, and transform controls for just the rectangle. So here, the rectangle has a position control that we can move position up and down. It has a scale control that we can scale up the anchor point of just the rectangle. It actually has its own anchor point in the center of itself. We have a skew control, which we never had before with transform controls, which means we have an ability to skew this in different directions. And we can change the skew axis so it skews kind of like this. Almost like a wobble there. But we can change which way it skews and which direction it skews from, etc. We can set this back to 0 and have this there. We do have a rotation control, and we have an opacity. And this is the opacity control for just the rectangle. Even though we have an opacity control for the whole thing, we have an opacity control for just the rectangle. Same thing that we have for the polygon. We have a transform controls for the polygon, and we have transform controls for the ellipse. So we can take the ellipse and take its transform controls and skew that if we wanted to, or rotate it, or all those things. We'll undo twice and just go back to here. Okay, so let's look at the contents of these folders. We'll go back to the rectangle and we'll look here. There is a fill control, and the fill control includes a bunch of different categories. A compositing control, how it composites there. The fill rule, which we'll talk about. The color of this. So we can simply change the color of this one rectangle. We'll click here, we'll open this up, and we'll change the color of this to a color shade of green, and now this is green. Fantastic. It even has an opacity of the fill. Not of the whole rectangle, but just the part that's being filled in. If I reduce the opacity of the fill to 0, now I just have the outline of the rectangle, and now it's just an outline of the rectangle minus the fill, which is now transparent. So even though this is the color green, it's not there right now, so it's now invisible. We have color, we have that, etc. there. The stroke above this, we have the stroke. We made a white stroke around this. We can now change the color of the white stroke and change this to red. Now we have a red stroke around this. Maybe even a brighter red stroke. We'll make it kind of a light red stroke. That way it's a little bit red, maybe even a pink stroke. Very bright pink stroke. Now we have a pink stroke around this one object here. We can change the stroke width, make the stroke wider, make it bigger. The opacity of this. Now we have a separate opacity, not for the fill, not even for the rectangle, not even for the whole shape layer, but just for the opacity of the stroke. And we'll change the opacity here to be lighter, and now you can see the stroke is coming through and being somewhat opaque or somewhat transparent on top of the fill. The compositing rule is below previous in same group. We can put above previous in same group. This will change some things about it, which we can talk about later. For now, it doesn't really matter as much. We can even, in the stroke, you'll notice that with the stroke, with the fill, with the entire rectangle, we can actually apply blending modes. So now here, if we have the stroke looking like this, and we have the polystar here, we can go to the polystar and say, change the polystar to screen mode or something like that. And it would do this, which is a different color. And the combinations of these now with the ellipse here at, say, hard light, we'll start to get some different changes based on if they're different colors or different levels of brightness. Depending on how the blending modes work, we could have some changes there. We can go to the ellipse fill and change the ellipse fill to, say, a different color. So we can appreciate this. This is yellow now. A little darker yellow. Now we're getting some different combinations here, some different arrangements here. We can change the stroke of the fill to a different color stroke, maybe a gray stroke. We'll change the size a little bit bigger so we can really see this. Now, man, we're getting a whole different world of combinations of how these things overlap based on what they have. And now even the stroke has its own blending mode. Exclusion, so now we're changing something else to how all these things relate to each other, how they all work, how they're all there. Let's go, and we're going to hide the ellipse for a second, and we're going to hide the polystar just so we can focus on just the rectangle here. We'll go back to the rectangle and we'll look at the other controls here. So not the transform controls, but inside the rectangle, you have some controls. Back to the stroke. We're going to take the stroke, we'll switch this back to normal mode, switch this back to normal mode. There, we'll look at the stroke here. Okay, so the stroke is in normal mode, it's over there like so. We're going to keep this full opacity, fully there. Great. Okay, with the stroke, you'll see there's a line cap and a line join. Let's focus on the line join. Right now it's doing a miter join. So imagine this like it was a framing of a window with a miter cut there, and so it's cut at an angle so it makes sharp edges. We can change the line join here to a rounded join, and therefore it has some rounding around the edges of there. We can also change it to a bevel join, which means it would have some sharp edges looking like that. We could change that, how that connects, how the connects of these lines connect. The line caps we can't really appreciate because this is completely enclosed, but what we can do is we could say, for example, let's take another shape layer. We'll click on the shape layer, and now we can use the pen tool. And with the pen tool, we can make just a line. We can make a line from here to here, and maybe to here. Now, this line has the blue filled in. Okay, so it has the blue filled in, but we don't want that. So we're going to do one of two things. We're going to go to the fill control, and we can either lower the opacity of the fill. Now we just have the line. Or we can literally delete the fill. Now there is no fill. This one shape inside this contents, because each shape can have a number of different parameters or a number of different properties, we can get rid of the fill, just delete it. Goodbye fill. Now it's just a stroke. It's a stroke across this line. It doesn't exist as anything else. This stroke. We can look at this stroke and we can say, okay, how does this stroke, when it's much bigger, how does it end? Well, it connects at each point with a miter join. We could change that to a rounded join and would have a rounded join. But how does it end? Do you want it to end with a butt cap or with a rounding cap? We can have a rounded cap, or we can have a projecting cap. Projecting cap you won't really appreciate just yet, but we'll get into it in a little bit. So now we have a butt cap, we have a rounded cap. We can decide for this how we want to be. We also see here, with any of the strokes, we have the ability to add dashes. So there's a little plus button to add dashes. So if we add dashes to this, and we'll do this here to the rectangle, we'll go here and add dashes to the rectangle. And now the rectangle, we'll change this back to a miter join here. And the rectangle, to a miter join, and we'll change this to a butt cap here. We'll go here and add dashes. So we hit the plus key here and add dashes, and now this thing has dashes. So now here, this has dashes. Now the dashes have a dash size. We can change the size of the dashes and make bigger dashes. And it separates the same amount of space between the space here and the dashes here. So this is we'll move this down to 100. So if this is a 100 pixel dash, there's 100 pixels of space in between there. There's also control to offset where the dashes are. So if you wanted the dashes not to fall on a corner, you could kind of almost make this work so it didn't fall right there on a corner, and it would be perfectly fine in terms of there. So this is a dash that's 100 pixels wide with 133 separation, offset. It's being moved so it doesn't fall in any corners. Otherwise, you get some weird kind of combinations of weird Tetris pieces in corners here. So if you didn't want that, you could kind of control it there. If you hit the plus again, you can hit the plus again and you can add more. So now you can add dashes, and then you can actually control separately the size of the dash, or the size of the gap. I said before that the dashes and the gaps would be the same size as the dash, but we want to change that and make the gap their own size. So in this, we're going to change the gap size to be bigger, and now they're bigger gaps and smaller dashes, or smaller gaps and bigger dashes, whatever it may be. We could change all this. You could make all kinds of things. Now, you're like, great, Chad, you can make weird shapes. It looks like, a 1980s trapper keeper or something. I mean, nothing really exciting about this. We take these shapes in here. Man, what did you make? I mean, you made a bunch of weird shapes. Cool. So it doesn't really help us here. But I just want to go a couple steps further. We're going to go back to this. We'll turn back this ellipse and this polystar off. And I do want to talk about the controls here for this unique shape. And this unique shape was made with the pen tool. All the same tools you can use to make masks, you can use to make shapes. So here, on the stroke of this, we got rid of the fill, but we have a stroke. We also have these new features called taper and wave. Let's look at wave. We can add wave here. There's a wave amount. We can actually make this stroke wavy. And now you can change the wave length, make it longer waves or tighter waves. Whoops, super tight waves. Down to nothing. You can also change the amount of the wave, how big the waves are, how wavy it is. You can also adjust the phase of the waves, of where the waves are. So you could animate this. If you wanted to stopwatch this, you could animate this. All these things can be stopwatch. And of course, the size of the waves would be ultimately the size of the stroke. So you make big waves, change the amount of waviness, etc. You could make waves there like so. If you don't want waves, we could turn waves off, reset this, and no more waves. There's also a taper mount. The taper mount works this way. We could say, let's taper this. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have a number of controls, a start length, an end length, a start width, an end width, a start ease, and an end ease. Let's take a look. This is going to be there. So the start length is going to be here. So it's going to taper into this, 36% into this here. It's going to taper like this. The end length is going to taper this way and taper into here, 39% into here. Let's just make it 25% of this, and we'll make this 25% of this. Now the start width is 0, so it goes from 0 to up to its regular size. We have it there. We could change this and have this be only like a little bit small, and then it gets bigger, or completely tight there. So we could change this, how much this tapers on either end, and there. So we could adjust the taper amount at either end. We can also change, this is a straight line, this is a linear taper. We could change the amount of easing of the taper. So the start ease would look like this, or like this, and we could kind of change how it eases there. So a little bit of play with the start width, with the start length, and change this. You could see how this thing eases there like so. So you have a little bit of ability to taper this tight or taper this with a little bit of a bowing. You have those controls there. Those are the controls just in the stroke and just how the stroke works. We go to the stroke and we could say, with each of these controls, we could reset this. We're going to delete this shape because I'm going to get rid of it and say forget U shape and go back to this. So now we have these shape controls. Let's go back to the rectangle. Let's look at the rectangle again. So we look at the stroke controls of the rectangle, and we could stroke and we could say wave this if we wanted to, turn the wave and add some wave length to this amount here and change this to wavy. That's weird. Looks like little fishes. Cool, and we could do that if we want to. Let's get rid of, we'll subtract the dashes, get rid of the dashes. No more dashes, no more dash gaps, no more dashes. We'll take the stroke, we'll bring the stroke down a little bit here like so. The last control gets a little bit strange because you have this thing called a rectangular path. Now, for me, I always thought this was redundant because you have a control here called size. And so for the size, you can make the size of the path. This is the path that I drew. So I drew a path like this, and I made this bigger or smaller. And you're like, oh, that's interesting, Chad, that you can make the path bigger or smaller, but you can also go here to the transform controls and make the scale bigger or smaller. Yes, you can. What does that mean? That means you have more than one control. You have a size control and a scale control. You will see at various points the order and the arrangement of these, where the size is versus where the scale is, what it's doing before, what it's doing after, will sometimes help you out by having a control here to change the size versus a control here to change the size of this. In different examples, you'll come up with different reasons for using either one, but I want you to understand that they're different. How are they different? Well, we'll see a little bit later. We also have a position control. Again, you have position control of where the path was drawn. Where the path was drawn, you also have a position of where the object is now that everything's added in. Again, why do we have both of these? Trust me, it'll make sense as you continue to play. It has a difference. There is a different reason for it. I used to think that there was no different reason for it. I was wrong. I learned. I was like, oh man, thank God there was a size and a position here, because it makes a whole world of difference of how this thing has an attribute. Up here, in addition to the regular rectangle, you can also make a rounded rectangle. So you could draw a rounded rectangle, which would have some rounding. But this rectangle doesn't have any rounding. So what do? Well, we're out of luck. We can't do anything with this. We don't have any rounding. Nope, wait, hold on. We can change some rounding to this and add some rounding. So for this, we have some rounding to this and change the rounding of that. Inside of here, in the polystar, we have a transform controls, a fill control, a stroke control. Those are all the same. But with the polystar, we also have some different changes of the path. We have the number of points. We used to not be able to change for a mask. We used to be only able to change the number of points while we were dragging it by hitting the up and down arrows. Now we have abilities to add more points or to take points away and change the size of this as it goes. We also have position control. We also have a rotation control. We also have, with this polygon, we also have what's called an outer radius and an outer roundness. We can make this rounded, more edges. So if we change the number of points and make this kind of a rounded triangle, we can make it look like that and play with the outer radius, which is actually different than the scale. It's a different value. If we went here and said, for example, make a star, we could make a star. You could actually change this one to a star as well. You could click this and make it a star instead of a polygon. Now it's a 3-pointed star. Now we have an outer radius. We'll change the number of points. We'll make a 5-sided star. We can change the inner roundness, the outer roundness, the inner radius, the outer radius, the inner roundness, how rounded it is on the inside, how rounded it is on the outside. There's all kinds of things. And you folk who've been working with Illustrator are like, yeah, this is really simple. We've done this a million times before. I understand. This is Illustrator work in After Effects. If you haven't done this in Illustrator, I'm sorry, this is your first time doing this. Cool. This is how this works. You can make this look like this. Fantastic. So you can make all these shapes. We're going to get rid of this. Cool. And we're going to start over here. So you can do this with these paths. With the ellipse, in the ellipse path, we can go in here and say ellipse path. We have basically only controls we have in the ellipse path. If we bring up the ellipse, we have a size, and we have a position of the ellipse path. Does it really do anything for us? Not really. But I'm going to delete it. We're going to start over. We're going to start from scratch. We'll delete this whole shape layer, and we're going to start over and start from scratch here like so. Okay, now, for example, what I want to do is I want to make an iPhone. I'm going to start with something simple, and this is how I learned how to make graphics in Illustrator, or more so make graphics in After Effects. I thought I couldn't draw, I didn't have the ability, I couldn't make shapes, and I couldn't make things, and I was like, how do you do this? And I started to play, and what I could do was, I'd said, let me just pick an object, just a random object, usually I pick some kind of electronic object, or some kind of household object, and I said, hey, let me see if I can make this. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to open up this picture of this iPhone I got off the internet. So I made this iPhone here, and this is this iPhone. This is actually an iPhone I grabbed off the internet. I'm going to take this footage panel, because I double clicked it in the project window. I opened up the footage panel, and I'm going to take this footage and I'm going to drag it over here and put it on the side. So here it is on the side. Here, we're just going to put it there so we can remember what an iPhone looks like. If you don't remember what an iPhone looks like, this is what an iPhone looks like. So we're going to take this and we're going to say, I'm going to make this shape. So in here, I'm going to go here down to the bottom. I don't have a shape layer yet. So in here, I'm going to make a shape group here. And I'm thinking that the shape of this should be probably a rounded rectangle. So I'm going to choose a rounded rectangle and make a rounded rectangle that's more tall than it is wide. And so I'm going to drag here, and it's going to be blue with a white edge, which I clearly don't want. And this, I don't like the rounding at all. I mean, the rounding looks pretty mediocre. So let's go in here, and let's start doing some tweaking, making some adjustments, some things we can do. I'm going to go into the rectangle, and I'm going to say in the rectangle path, well, let's go to the fill color first. Let's go to fill color, and we can actually grab the eyedropper, and we'll choose this color gray. There, boom, it made this color gray. Fantastic. Excellent. We don't need a stroke. I don't think we need a stroke around this because there is no stroke around this. So we're going to click on the stroke and delete the stroke. Goodbye stroke. Now we just have this shape that looks like this. It doesn't look like an iPhone yet, so we're going to go to the rectangular path. And in the rectangular path, we're going to add some more rounding. What do you think, 40 maybe? Does that feel better? It's not bad. Maybe a little bit more. Maybe 55. 55.7. Yes, that's perfect. I don't know. I'm guessing here. I don't know. That looks a little, maybe even more. Maybe 65. 64.3. There we go. That's not, yeah, there's 64.3. That's industry standard right there. So there's my shape there. There's my iPhone. It look, man, I mean, automatically it looks like an iPhone. Let's be honest. It looks like an iPhone there. Okay. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to make this camera screen here. We're going to make some kind of a camera screen here like this. We're going to kind of design this in a kind of cartoonish way, but we're going to design this to look like a camera screen inside of here. So let's go on the shape layer. Now, we don't want to click on the rectangle because we're not going to adjust the rectangle, but we're going to do the shape layer, and we're going to say, let's make this box here. This is going to be another rounded rectangle. So we're going to click on the rounded rectangle, and we'll drag somewhere about here, and you can drag across this way and make this kind of shape inside. Let's say roughly about like this, somewhere to the middle. We'll make this shape like there. Cool, we grab this, we made this shape in here, and we grab like so. Okay, so now we have this gray with the white. This is rectangle number 2. We're going to label this. If you've ever worked in Photoshop or in Illustrator, and you know that you should label your stuff, we're going to call this the body of this. And now we're going to call this the, I don't know, we'll just call this the camera frame or something. The camera frame. I don't know what this is called. You can talk to somebody at Apple to know what this little contraption is called. I don't know. We'll call it the camera frame. Now, I don't like this. So right at the bat, we're going to keep the fill, but we're going to keep the fill. Actually, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to delete the stroke. I know, you're like, but there is sort of a stroke around this. I know there is. Trust me, I know what I'm doing here. We're going to delete, actually, we're going to delete the fill. We'll delete the fill, because right now it's gray. And it's sort of gray in part of this, but actually because of the way the light hits it, and I really like the way the light hits it, it's like lighter gray here and then darker gray here. And this fill, we can change this to a color. We can click on this and click on this color to make this lighter gray, and it would look like this, you know, which is okay, but it's not great. So let's make it great. Let's click this fill, and let's say, let's delete this fill. Because I know that if I click on this camera frame, now we're clicking the camera frame, we're making sure that we're on the camera frame. We're going to go to add, and in add, there is a gradient fill. Oh, so there's a fill. You can add a fill back in. If you deleted your fill by accident, you can go to this add section, add your fill back in, and you can get your fill back. Cool, but we don't want that, so let's undo. What we want here is we want a gradient fill, and a gradient fill will make a black and white pattern that looks like this. Okay, that's not exactly what we want. So let's go in the gradient fill and let's see what we can do. Let's try to come up with something we can figure out to make this better. We're going to hit a gradient fill, and we'll see, okay, there's colors. Under the colors section, we have edit gradients. Colors. We want this to go from light gray to darker gray, and we can click on this little stop right here. We can use the eyedropper, and we can literally pick this light color gray here. Okay, so we have this light color gray like this, kind of the lightest gray that this can be. We're going to go to this stop over here, and we're going to click the eyedropper here. So we clicked on this stop. We're going to go here to this dark gray and get like the darkest gray we can grab. Kind of right there. Okay, so now we have this looking like there, but it's not at the right angle. So now there's a control for the start point, and you'll see in really closely, if you look really closely, there's a little blue dot right here. And it gives you a start point that you can move, and it gives you an end point over here. This little dot right here is an end point. You can move the end point to move this here. But we want to just grab these because it's probably going to be easier to grab this and put this one over here and put this one over kind of here. We want this to be a little bit darker quicker. What we may want to do is go back to edit gradients, and if we take these two stops and put them closer together, the transition between the light and the dark is a little bit more drastic. So it's a little bit more drastic as it comes over. And now maybe we'll take this and make this just kind of like this to this. You know, we can determine how we want this to be, how we want this to drift off. And now we have this looking like there. So we start to have this kind of blend there. You can work it a little bit better than I can, make it a little better. Again, I don't want this white fill around here, but I noticed that in here, it starts out gray on the outside and then goes into a darker gray on the inside. So let's see if I can imitate this. I'm going to get rid of the fill, or get rid of the stroke. So we're going to go to stroke, we're going to get rid of the stroke, delete the stroke, and we're going to go to camera frame, and I'm going to add in a gradient stroke. Gradient stroke is going to put a gradient stroke around there. It's going to make that gradient stroke white to black. And so we're going to make this gradient stroke a little bit bigger so we can really see this. We'll change this from a 2 size to a something bigger. So now we see that this is white to black. The stroke is coming in here, a white to black. And here's the two dots. Here's the white side dot. Here's the black side dot. I don't want this. I want black. I probably want black on the inside, or at least dark gray. So let's go here to Edit Gradients. In Edit Gradients, I'm going to change the black to maybe just a dark gray. Dark gray. Charcoal. Yeah, love it. Just almost black. And change this one, this edit gradient, this white stop. We'll make this white stop like a light gray, like almost like this same color gray here. So we're just going to do eyedropper and grab this kind of gray like there. I'm making a little bit of mistakes here, but we can keep this as it is. Or we can make this two things. So let's just take this and do this a different way, because I'm making kind of a mess here and I don't really know what I'm doing. So let's try to take this a different way. And this would be a good example. So we're going to take this and we're going to make one of these. So we're going to add a stroke in here. So now we have no fill. So we have the fill, but we don't have a stroke. So we're going to take the stroke, and I'll show you what we're going to do. We're going to take this and we're going to add in a single stroke. And that stroke is going to be black. And this might be a way to do this. So we're going to take the stroke, and we're going to have a stroke, and we're going to make the stroke black. So we're going to make it dark. This might have been the easier way to do this from there. And this is good because we get to experience kind of different ways of doing things. Because again, it's there. So now we have the black stroke, but we don't have this gray stroke around it. So we want this to be smaller. We want this to be like a 4. And then here, we want to go here, and we want to say that with this, we want to put a bigger stroke around this. So we're going to have another stroke. We're going to hit this and duplicate and have another stroke, and this is going to be stroke number 2. Yeah, we can have 2 strokes here. And so this stroke will be this gray color. Again, this gray color. This stroke will be a little bit wider. And so this stroke will be a little bit thicker and come around entirely. But we want this stroke, again, this stroke of this part, to come out and be a little bit bigger of a bigger object in there. So now we can change a little bit of the size of this and how this thing there. So what we can do is we could say, let's take another shape. Let's actually get rid of this stroke, or we'll just keep the stroke for a second. We're going to duplicate this camera frame. We're going to duplicate it. Make camera frame number 2. And camera frame number 1 will not have the second stroke. Camera frame number 2 will not have the first stroke. So now we have the second stroke on top of the first stroke. We're going to put the second stroke underneath the first stroke, between that and the body. Cool, so it's like this. And then camera frame number 2, the path of this will be a little bit bigger. It'll be outside of here. So now we have this kind of like a second stroke. I'm going to make the second stroke of the second camera frame a little bit darker. Just so we can see it against the other object. And so we can start to play a little bit like there and have this kind of frame like there. So we're starting to get closer to the idea of the frame. Okay, I'm going to take all of these, camera frame 2, command click, and the body, and I'm going to put them into a group. I'm going to hit Command G and put them into a group. We're going to call that group frame. Command G will put them into a group, and now we have a group that's a frame. Okay, I'm going to make these different cameras here. So we're going to go back to the contents, and we're going to go and grab a circle. So we're going to have a circle, and we'll grab an ellipse. Now, if you want to, you can hold down, when you drag this, you're going to drag from left to right, it's going to make a circle like this. Hold down Shift, it makes a perfect circle. What you can do is you can actually grab from the center, and if you hold down Command, it'll actually pull out a radius. This pulls a diameter and pulls it this way, which is fine. You can do that as well. But if you ever want to pull out from the center, you can hold down Command when you pull out, and it will pull a radius out and pull out from the center. So it's not, just in case, it's not pulling out from one left side to the right, like top left to bottom right. It's pulling out from the center. And if I hold down Shift, I'll make a perfect circle, and I'll make a circle that looks like this. Okay, now we've made a shape. Here's the truth. I don't want this ellipse, or I don't want this stroke, and I don't want this fill. And here's why. I'm going to go click on the ellipse. Make sure I'm clicked on the ellipse, and I'm going to add in a gradient fill. We're in a gradient fill, and now we're going to see how this looks. So this is going to be, sorry, I didn't hit gradient fill, I hit fill. We're going to add a gradient fill in here, and we're going to add a gradient fill inside here. I was not clicked. Notice I was not clicked on the ellipse when I added the gradient fill, so it didn't add the gradient fill to the ellipse. I need to be clicked on the ellipse. Click on the ellipse, add in the gradient fill. It adds the gradient fill in the ellipse. Okay, so let's look at the gradient fill here. We're clicking the gradient fill, and we see the gradient fill controls here. Okay, let's change the gradient fills. I'm going to make the center of this bluish in the center, and then black on the outside. So we're going to click Edit Gradients. We'll make the center of this kind of like a dark blue color. It's not a purple, like a dark blue. Cool, a dark blue color. And then we're going to go here to the gradient fill, and we're going to say make the edit gradients, the outside of this like a black, which it already is. So, okay, now what I want to do is I want to look at this gradient fill, and I can look at the start point and the end point, and I can start to move the start point and the end point and see how the start point and end point moves. Let me zoom out a little bit so we can see this a little bit better, and we'll zoom into here to see this a little bit there. So I have this ellipse, and I have this gradient fill, and this gradient fill is on this ellipse, and I have these controls there. I'm going to switch to a linear, from a linear to a radial gradient, and I'll get this shape. Now it's blue in the center, darker blue on the outside. I'm going to move these closer together and have this be black with the blue in the center. And so it's blue in the center, black on the outside. That looks pretty good, actually. I'm gonna hit V key. Sorry, make sure in the V key. That way I can see. If I'm using the ellipse tool, I can't see my my little controls. But I'm gonna go to selection tool. Now I can see my controls. That makes my world a whole lot easier. Go to gradient fill, and now I can see these controls. Here's the outer gradient. Here's the inner part of the gradient, and it makes an ellipse here and pulls this like so. So now I have here this kind of blue looking gradient here. I can pull this a little bit tighter and have this be just blue in the center here and make this little blue, a blue center. If I wanted this to be sharper, I could go to Edit Gradients and pull this blue and this black close together. And now it has a closer, more defined transition between one and the other, so it's really tight. Now you can see the blue and the green go right from blue right from black right to blue. And again, I can pull these tighter and make this bigger or smaller. So this is my gradient here, how my gradient sits and how it fits inside of here. I have this gradient looking like there. Great. So this is my gradient. Hey, I mean, let's be honest. It looks kind of like this. It's not perfect, but you get the idea. It looks kind of like this. You know, we could put more stops in here. We could go to Edit Gradients. If we really wanted to go crazy, we go here, add another stop in here. And in between here, we'd add like a white, and therefore we'd have another white section. Maybe we move the white over this way and then have it be like black into blue into white. And then we can, I think, make another stop and make this stop dark blue as well. And now we have kind of like a weird ring inside. You know, some kind of weird combination there. I know we're making something. We're making art here. You know, we have some kind of thing that looks like something like this, some kind of playfulness like there. Anyway, have some kind of thing. Maybe it's not totally white. Maybe this one is like light blue or something, just kind of like weird, or coming gray or something like there. Again, how you separate these two and how far apart they're separated, you'll see that'll have kind of a weird combination, something like that. So now we have a weird gradient inside there. We're getting really artsy and really creative and really clever. Now, with this ellipse, we also want this edge of the ellipse to have this ring around it. So we're going to go to the stroke controls, ellipse. We're going to add a gradient stroke here. It's going to add a gradient stroke around here. We're going to take the gradient stroke parameters, and this is white into black almost. So we can almost pull this like this and pull this way and pull this point this way and have this go drift from white to black. Oh, that's the wrong thing. Sorry, let's click on, that's the gradient fill. We're going to go in gradient stroke. And I just want to see the gradient stroke points. Here's the start point. Here's the end point. So we're going to grab the gradient stroke and pull this kind of this way into this way. Oh, there we go. Look at that. So now we have this gradient stroke. This is a linear gradient because it's going to go from white to black and follow the light. And so now we have, I mean, this is starting to look pretty good. Kind of like there. I mean, that's, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it just, man, that's, I mean, that looks okay, right? That looks pretty good. Again, I don't like the edge of the, I'm going to maybe go back to the frame and go back to the outer frame, camera frame 2, and go back to stroke size. Maybe make it a little bit smaller. Maybe make it like 12 or 15 or something there. A little bit thinner, maybe even a little darker. We could maybe put a linear gradient on this as well, maybe a little darker. Just so it pops out a little bit more. Again, maybe to 12. You know, what can you make? What can you do? There we have this frame like this. Maybe this needs to be a little bit more rounder, so maybe the frame itself, the path of these, we're going to change the path to the roundness, change this to like 30 maybe. and change the path of this one, of this frame here, the path to 30 as well, just so it's even more round as it goes in. Yeah, I feel better about that because this should be a little bit more round than this is. The actual body is not as round, so we're going to go to the rectangular path and change this to, well, this has a lot of roundness. Oh, no, this is the body. We want to go to the, oh, no, that's camera frame 1, camera frame 2. So that's fine. Yeah, cool. That looks good. Okay, so we have this like there. Great. And now we can take this ellipse. We can call this camera, or we'll call this camera 1. Camera 1. And now we can take this guy and we can duplicate him, camera 2, and make camera 2. And we can move camera 2 over here, maybe like this, and go here and duplicate it again, camera 3, and put them over here. Now these cameras I think should be a little bit bigger, so we can take these 2 cameras, we can open them up, we can go up to the ellipse path of each of these, change the size of this to from 61.4 to maybe 70. Change this camera 2 ellipse path up here to 70 as well. They fit a little better. Camera 1s, go to the ellipse path and change them to 70. So there's a lot of hierarchy here. It gets a little bit overwhelming sometimes, a little bit scary for the hierarchy. I think the stroke on these need to be a little bit bigger on each of the gradient strokes. So maybe we can change the gradient stroke to like 5. A little bit bigger stroke. Yeah, that feels a little bit better. And obviously there's more light on this one than there is on this one than there is on this one, so this one's more black overall, so each of them should have their own amount of change of gradient, which now we're getting really technical, but I don't think we need to get that technical in terms of there. I think this would be okay. We'll change the stroke of this to 5. Cool, and we'll change the stroke of camera 2. Let's see, camera 2, camera 3. Where's camera 1? Camera 1 is gradient stroke. We'll change this to 5. And yeah, if we wanted to, we could take this camera 3 and we could say, let's look at the gradient stroke and let's adjust the gradient stroke so it's a little bit more black overall, you know, so it has a little bit different shading. And it ends up being, whoops, that's the circle. And this is more black. I mean, if we really wanted to get technical, we could make some real changes to that of how it looks overall in terms of capacity. We could spend some time doing this there. But so far, I mean, I would believe that's an iPhone. For me, I would believe that's an iPhone. I would say, okay, I know what he's doing there. He made an iPhone. Cool, it looks like an iPhone. Could we put little edges on the side here? Yeah, we could put little buttons on the side here. We could take little rectangles. Just for example, we can take little rectangles here. Little rectangles. Then we want to be back in the shape layer. And we're going to call this shape layer, just so we have the whole shape layer. We're going to call this iPhone, just so we know what this is. And we have this iPhone here. And yeah, we could take little rectangles, maybe little rounded rectangles. And we're just going to put a round rectangle on the side here. Just kind of there, like there. We don't need a stroke. So we'll take this rounded rectangle. We'll call this button 1. This will be button 1. Sorry, let's hit return. Button 1. Big button. We'll get rid of the stroke. This can be a little bit, we can change the path and change the size of the path to make it a little bit longer, a little bit thinner, like there. We can move the position over this a little bit like there. Just have it there, and we have a button there. Great. V key, we have a little button on the side there. We can take this button here, and we can put this button kind of behind this. So we can take this button here, because we want to put it behind the body so that it's not necessarily in front of the body. It's behind the body. And there. And so we have this like there. We also have, and I made a mistake here, we have the body, the actual body of the camera frame, not the camera frame, but the body inside of the frame section. So we're going to take the body and we're going to drag it out of the frame section so it's its own separate thing. I think it needs to be its own separate thing. I think that's better there and has that idea. And so we can have this as a camera. And can we make more buttons? Yeah, we could duplicate these buttons. Command D, duplicate the buttons. Make another button over here, etc. Have those controls and have, you know, something that looks more like an iPhone. What we don't have is we don't have the Apple logo inside of here. So here's a trick. Here's a trick we can do. It's really, really easy. I downloaded a picture of an Apple logo off the interweb. So here's an Apple logo that I got. Now, I made sure that when I got this Apple logo is an Adobe Illustrator file. This is an Adobe Illustrator file. It's not a typical JPEG. It's not like the iPhone. It's not a QuickTime movie or anything else. This is an Adobe Illustrator file. What does that mean? That means I can do this, and this is kind of fun. I'm going to take this Apple logo, and I could, simply enough, take this Apple logo, and here's the Apple logo. Great. I could go here. I could scale down the Apple logo, make it smaller, and I could put it here. Great, it's an apple. But it's not really part of this, and I want it to be kind of part of this. I want it to be self-included inside of here as a separate part of this. So here's one of the fun things I can do with vector art. So if you have things that are vector art, not based on bitmapped art, not like a JPEG or a PNG or a bitmap images, but you have a vector art, something like an Adobe Illustrator file or an EPS file, anything that was based on vector math to draw shapes. So if you ever go online and you look up vector art for things, vector art for logos or vector art for graphics, if you have a vector art, you can go to vector art inside of Adobe After Effects. You can right click and you can say create shapes from vector layers. I can create shapes from vector layers? What does that mean? What it does is it turns this vector art, it says, I know this is vector art. I can redraw this as shape layers because After Effects works with shape layers. And so in here, I can convert this to a shape layer and make a shape layer. It turns the Apple logo off, but we can just delete the Apple logo. Goodbye Apple logo. And now we have this as an Apple logo as vector art. And inside the content, you'll see there's a group 1, and group 1 is this part of it. Group 2 is this part of it, and it contains a shape, a path, a fill. It doesn't even create a stroke because the vector art itself that was made in Illustrator, like I said, this was an Illustrator file. And since Adobe knows this is an Illustrator file, it says, hey, there was no stroke that was made with the shape. I have it here. So we can take group 1 and group 2, and we can throw them in. So we can say, okay, we'll take group 1 and group 2. We're gonna group them again. So this is we'll call this, I don't know what this is called, the Apple body. Apple body. We'll call group 2, this guy, the Apple leaf. Never thought about this before. We'll take both of these and we're going to throw these into a group. We're going to take these and we're going to throw them in a group. And we're going to hit Command G to group them. And we're going to call this logo. So inside the logo, and this is the kind of the hierarchy of how these things are arranged. We could take these 3 cameras, all 3 of these cameras, and put this into a group called cameras. Camera group. You may want to do this. You may want to have these super organized to make your life easier so you can have them as groups things. And the group itself has transform controls, so you can actually rotate all of this. If you want to animate this and make some kind of weird rotation of these circles, you could do that as well. We don't want to do that, so we're going to undo. Now what I'm going to do is I have this in 2 separate layers, which I don't really like. So I'm going to grab this logo. We're going to hit Command C. Copy. We're going to go in here into the contents folder and Command V and paste this in here. Now, it made this super big, and that's because of some of the things we did with this. But that's okay. That's not a big deal. It put this here in this logo group, and it made it really big. We don't need this anymore because this is immaterial. It made this big because of some things that it did with there. But thankfully, we have transform controls for the logo. So we can transform control this, change the scale to much smaller. We can actually just grab this and move this over. Now, it's behind the rest of the body, so we probably want to put it in front or on top of the body, and so it's there on top of the body. Now, the color is not really what we want to, but of course, the body, we can go here to the Apple body, and we can say fill color. Well, let's change the fill color to a dark shade of black there, or dark shade of gray. Cool. Except the leaf is not a dark shade of gray. Now, another thing we could do, and this is a little bit weird, we could say, hey, I want this to be all the same color, and I want to have to not change the leaf and change the body at the same time. I want to have to go. So say, for example, I say, oh, you know what? The logo should be red. So I go here and I say, okay, I make the leaf. I go back and click on the leaf, and I click on the fill color for the leaf. And I say, I want the leaf to be this color as well. And so now they're both this color, and now they're both that color. And then somebody comes along and says, hey, can you make the Apple logo red? And this is a kind of a strange thing. I can say, oh, okay, I can make the body red, and I'll make the body shade of red, and I'll go to the leaf, and I'll click on the leaf and make the leaf red. And it's just 2 steps. It's just 2 steps, and 2 steps is annoying. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go into the Apple body, and we're going to delete the fill. There is no fill right now. And we're going to go to the Apple leaf, and we're going to delete the fill, and there is no fill. So there is no fill. But these are in the group. And one of the things you can do is you can click on the logo and add in a fill that is after the Apple body and leaf. Since this is a group, we can add a fill to the group. This is like almost adding a fill effect. If you ever went to the generate fill effect, this is like adding a fill effect after these 2 things. And if you add them after these 2 things, now you have one fill to rule them all. And here we can change this fill now to whatever color we want it to be. And now it makes both of them that way. We can do the same thing with a stroke. We could say, I want the Apple body and I want the Apple stroke, but I want one thing to control how all of this works and how everything works here. And so we can say here, add in a stroke on the logo, and we have a stroke here, and now the stroke is the stroke for everything. All of the parts, all of the pieces, they all have a stroke. They're all, I don't know. I hope you get the idea. Anyway, these are things you can do there. And you could do that with like anything. So there is a really big learning curve with the hierarchy of how the hierarchy is laid out and what you can make and what you can do. But there is some things you can do of how you organize these, how you group these, how you put these in groups. So right now in the contents, for example, we have the camera group, we have the frame, we have the button 1, button 2. We could group these into a button. So we can have this, Command G, and group these into a group and call this the button group. Button group. And we have the logo in the body, and then you can go into contents and you can add in other things. So you could add a stroke around the whole thing and add a stroke after the whole thing, and that would put a stroke around everything. So it's stroke out everything and put a stroke around the whole outside of the entire thing, because it's stroking the body and everything else around it, because it strokes around the alpha channel, and put a stroke around the whole group, even the buttons. So even though the buttons stick out, you can make shapes and you can make things. So my recommendation is, make something, try something. Just decide, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to make an object. I'm going to take an object and I'm going to make an object. Maybe it's an iPhone. Maybe it's a microwave or a toaster oven or a lampshade or something else. A speaker. You can go online and you can grab in a picture of a speaker, and you could say, grab in a picture of a JBL speaker and say, cool, I want to grab in a picture of, or maybe like a KRK speaker, and you could make this. Could I make this? Could I make this with a rounded rectangle and a couple circles and a couple shapes and put some text in there and make the screw holes and whatever else it may be? Or can I make, the red speakers? The red speakers would be more, look at those. Those are interesting. Or can I make a keyboard? Can I make a computer keyboard? A Logitech keyboard? Could I make something that looks like a shape of some kind of thing? Could I make this? Could I build this? This would be this is interesting. This is cool. So you have a couple of rounded rectangles, some circles. This would be relatively easy. Could I make some random shape? Could I make some kind of a lamp? A desk lamp? Find some interesting shape and see if you can build it. You can bring in some vector art, but can you make something that looks like, this or whatever it may be? And can you build this with shapes? Obviously not with the wood grain, but something that looks more cartoony or graphic-y. Could you make these objects and make these shapes, etc.? I think I'll get rid of this stroke because it really ruins it. But maybe even just a little bit of stroke around the outside of this, just so it has a little bit of body to it. And we can put the stroke before... Yeah, we can put the stroke before the buttons. We'll put the buttons underneath, the button group underneath the stroke, and now the button group won't be stroked. Right there. And now the button group is not stroked, so now we have a stroke. But we'll change the stroke not to a shade of black, but just to this gray. We'll go this gray just a little bit darker, and we'll go super just a little bit darker. That way it has a little bit of a fading off, and you can see the buttons are behind it. Because it has, see how that looks now? I'll show you that here. Look at how this looks. With this, the buttons are behind right now. So you can see that in here, the buttons are behind this because we added that little bit of stroke, and then we added the buttons underneath this. So we put the buttons behind. Without the stroke, just to show you, without the stroke, it looks like this. It looks like all one piece. But this separates the buttons out, so it's like the buttons are kind of embedded inside of there. I think that little stroke afterwards made all the difference. I think that really, spelled this out and made this kind of cool. Yeah, so random things we can do, random games we can play. I feel like I still want to go back to the frame and tweak the frame a little bit more. I feel like this could be, the stroke of this frame could be a little bit bigger. That way it has a little bit better separation. Something. We could play. We're going to continue to play. I'm going to get crazy and I'll obsess over this, but, And here's the truth. There's probably vector art of an iPhone that already exists. We can make vector art of an iPhone and it would be perfectly fine to work with. But things we could do. Why does the iPhone, or why does the Apple logo have a big white stroke around it? Yeah, I don't want that. Cool, get rid of that. That feels better. That feels like an iPhone right there. I mean, if you saw that, you'd be like, oh, that's an iPhone. Yeah, clearly that's an iPhone. I mean, it doesn't have the little white spot and the black spot, but we could make those. Anyway, if you saw that, you'd be like, that's totally an iPhone. And we can make this. And the fun thing of this is it's totally animatable. It's totally animatable, and there's lots of fun stuff we can do with this. So in the next lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to start to play with these and start to make some things that you can see, and you can be like, oh, yeah, I can totally make some cool stuff, and I can animate some cool stuff. Right now, we're just building stuff, and we're kind of creating stuff. But man, we can go into this, and we can really start to play and animate this and make some cool ideas inside of here. So I hope you enjoyed that. Again, make some cool art. And again, like I said, I'm not a graphic artist, but I can at least make this and feel good about myself because I made this. I hope you felt good too, or at least you feel good for me. I don't know. Have fun. Enjoy the rest of your day.